We've reached a point in powerlifting where having an insane performance is not necessarily enough to guarantee you the win. In fact, in recent years, we've seen some crazy showings from some of the best lifters in the world that have still resulted in losses. In this video, I'm going to go through 7 of those examples. Starting off with Tim Monigatti at 2023 IPF Worlds. So Tim totaled 778 on this day with the following lifts: a 283.5 kilo world record at the time squat, IPF world record squat, and this 170 kilo bench. Pretty smooth lift. And what was also an IPF world record at the time, a 324.5 kilo deadlift, which only stood as the IPF world record deadlift in the 74s for about a few minutes before it was broken again. But there you have it, 778 as a 74. Now, what makes this an entry on my list isn't necessarily the total itself, because 778 is insane, don't get me wrong, but we've seen quite a bit higher than that at 74. The reason why this is on my list is because Tim Monigatti at this meet beat Taylor Atwood. He finished in second, Taylor Atwood finished in third, and Tim Monigatti was the one who snapped the winning streak of Taylor Atwood first, technically. So Taylor Atwood at this point in time, going into 2023 Worlds, not only was he the defending world champion, but he was a 3-time world champion who had gone undefeated since all the way back in 2017 Worlds, when he last lost, and that was against none other than Shell Backlund. Since that point, he's beaten everyone, and he's won 3 world titles. He's won best lifter at Worlds. He established himself as the undisputed pound for pound best in the sport with that 838.5 USAPL performance he did as a 74. He was considered unbeatable. The previous year in 2022, he had won Worlds by a landslide with sandbagging his lifts. And we knew coming into this he wasn't necessarily going to be at his best or most healthy, but he was still the heavy favorite coming in. This was still a huge upset. And Tim Monigatti was the one who snapped the winning streak off Taylor Atwood. However, beating Taylor Atwood wasn't enough to win, which is absolutely insane. No one would have believed you if you had said that before, because Tim Monigatti lost to Kalle Johansson. Kalle Johansson of Sweden ended up taking the gold and winning. He also hit a 778 total. Taylor Atwood in this meet, I should mention, also totaled 777.5. This was a very close podium, separated by half a kilo. And Tim and Kalle were separated on body weight. And Kalle was the one that broke the world record deadlift after Tim just a few minutes after to match his total and win on body weight. Tim ended up getting his revenge at Sheffield in 2024 when he beat Kalle head to head. And since then, both lifters have moved up to the 83 kilo category. Actually, so has Taylor Atwood. Okay, my next entry is one that is very underrated and not many people probably are aware of. Joe Borenstein at 2023 USAPL Nationals. We all know Joe Borenstein today as the strongest 83 kilo lifter on the planet and in the history of the planet. But back in 2023, he was playing second fiddle to Austin Perkins. So he totaled 800.5 kilos as a 75 kilo lifter because of the USAPL's genius idea to shift weight classes, because what could possibly go wrong there? Idiots. But a very impressive 600 pound squat from Joey B. A 190 kilo bench. Also keep in mind, he was only 20 years old at this time. 20 years old. Mind-boggling. And a 338 kilo deadlift that you see here, which is only 2.5 kilos lower than the biggest ever 74 deadlift at the time, and above the IPF world record. For context, this happened September 2023, so literally like 3 months after Worlds, and I just showed you what the performances were at Worlds, right? We saw the 778. So Joey B, a few months after the fact, basically beat everyone that was at Worlds that year, and put up a heavier deadlift than the IPF world record deadlift. 800.5. Now the significance of that is Joe Borenstein became just the 3rd ever 74/75 to hit 800. And again, it pains me to have to put that slash there, but you know, we have to take into account what the USAPL did. But yeah, 74/75. He was the third ever person to hit 800 at that bodyweight, behind, of course, only Taylor Atwood, who did it first, and Austin Perkins. So the only people that could possibly have beaten him would have been a prime Taylor Atwood, which he wasn't at that point in time. So the only person that could actually beat him was Austin Perkins. And lo and behold, who was there on that day? Austin Perkins. Joe Borenstein ended up losing. He came second. He lost to Austin Perkins, who put up his legendary 851. This was the meet where Perk did his 851, which still stands to this day as the arguably single most impressive tested male performance of all time in powerlifting. It is the highest dot score of all time if you put much weighting on that sort of thing. And that is why this performance from Joey B gets pretty overshadowed, because everyone was left talking about how insane the 851 was, and no one really gave props to the 20-year-old kid who just crossed the 800 barrier and was only the third person to ever do it. He did this before Shell did it. Shell first crossed 800 December of that year in 2023, and then later took the world record to 815 in early 2024. So he did this even before the legend Shell Backlund did as a 74. Again, he was slightly heavier as a 75. Yeah, well, I try and group these two weight classes together because they should have never split in the first place. But Joe Borenstein, he did one more meet at that 75 kilo weight class after this, where he totaled 820, which is heavier than what Shell's ever done as a 74. So that still stands as the third highest total ever at that 74-75 body weight. And then he moved up to the 83s, and the rest is history. We all know, we all know how that story ended. Next up, so my number 3 and 4, my third and fourth lifters are kind of grouped together because they happen at the same meet, and that is Leah Bavoil and Carola Garra at 2024 Sheffield. So go through Leah Bavoil's lifts first. So this 225 kilo squat. This was in the 69 kilo weight class, 122.5 kilo bench. And this 237.5 kilo deadlift to lock up a 585 kilo total in the 69 kilo class, absolutely shattering the previous world record. So look at Carola Garra's lifts. So Carola Garra also had a phenomenal showing, totaling only 2.5 kilos less with his 220 kilo squat. Only 5 kilos below Leah Bavoil's record that she set at that meet that we just looked at. This absolutely monster 150 bench, which if it weren't for a certain Polish woman would be the biggest bench ever at that weight class. And a 212.5 kilo deadlift to give her that crazy 582.5 kilo total, which again absolutely shattered the previous world record. Now, why is this on my list? Well, they ended up losing to Agatha Shitko, and they lost that head-to-head battle in the 69s against Agatha. The entire Sheffield podium that year on the women's side was made up of the 69 kilo lifters, right? So it's not like they lost because someone else did something independent of them in another weight class. No, they lost head-to-head to Agatha. But the reason it was crazy is, apart from Agatha Shitko on that day, so apart from the girl that they lost to, Leah Bavoil and Carola Garra put up the biggest world record breaks in Sheffield history at the time, 106.55% for Leah and 106.1 for Carola Garra. Those still stand as the second and third biggest ever world record breaks on the women's side, and they're still up there with the biggest ever on either side. In fact, the only lifter since that has put up a bigger world record total break across either gender is Shell Backlund, who did 106.21 to win Sheffield this year on the men's side. So Leah Bavoil and Carola Garra, most impressive Sheffield performances world record break wise, aside from the woman that they ended up losing to, Agatha. And not just that, this was also the biggest ever female dots by both lifters, again apart from Agatha on that day. So after that meet, this was the ranking of the dot scores. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of dots myself. However, there is some value in it in looking at absolute displays of relative strength. And if you're a fan of that sort of thing, here's the rankings. So these were all the 6 lifters post 2024 Sheffield, like immediately after, that had gone 600 plus dots raw. And you can see Leah Bavoil 3rd all time and Carola Garra 5th all time. And they're both the best female dots ever, behind only Agatha Shitko. And that was done on that day when she hit her magical 600 as a 69. If you fast forward to today, we've seen 3 more lifters hit 600 dots raw. That's Meg Scanlon, as she did at PA Nats, Joe Borenstein's 900 also PA Nats, and Shell Backlund's 770 at Sheffield. But you can see that Leah Bavoil and Carola Garra still have the best female dots ever behind Agatha. Well, also behind Meg Scanlon now. So they're now number 3 and 4 all time on the female side. But they're still right up there in very elite company. So it just puts into perspective how absolutely insane these performances were from these women. And the only woman ever in the history of the human race who could ever have beaten them on that day was that exact version of Agatha Shitko. And unfortunately for Leah and Carola, that version of Agatha Shitko was the one that was there, and she did in fact total 600 and end up winning. And somehow Leah Bavoil and Carola Garra lost despite those insane metrics I showed you. To this day, that is still the only ever instance of a loss happening when a powerlifter hits a 600 dots. No powerlifter has ever lost with a 600 dots before. Our next one, Temur Samkharadze at 2024 Worlds. Now, Temur has been finishing up there on the podium at Worlds for a couple years now, behind Jesus. However, 2024 Worlds last year was the first time where it was kind of sort of close. And if Jesus had slipped up any more than what he did, or had come in any further away from his peak than he did, Temur absolutely was there and ready to pounce on him. So Temur had a phenomenal meet. He was still a junior at this point as well, so I'm pretty sure he took every single one of Jesus's junior world records. A 430 kilo squat, insane lift there, a 255 kilo bench, and yeah, like I said, both those lifts were junior world records, which used to be held by Jesus. Crazy power. And a 402.5 kilo deadlift to lock up a 1087.5 kilo total, just shy of 2,400 pounds. Here's his deadlift here. Very impressive lift. So yeah, just shy of 2,400 pounds. And the significance of this and why it is so impressive despite him losing is because that is the 3rd biggest raw total ever. 3rd biggest raw tested total the history of powerlifting has ever seen, behind only, of course, Jesus and Ray Williams. So behind the 2 greatest super heavyweight powerlifters of all time, you could argue the 2 greatest powerlifters of all time, regardless of weight class, those were the only 2 people that could have possibly out-totaled and beaten that version of Temur on that day. Unfortunately for Temur, one of those lifters happened to be there, and that was in fact Jesus. So Jesus ended up winning with, I think, 1112.5 or thereabouts, which only a 25 kilo gap between them, which is one attempt when it comes to the super heavyweight. So it was closer than a lot of people thought it was going to be, and I'm sure Jesus and his team got maybe a bit of a fright there. Temur went 8 for 9. He missed his final deadlift of 415 to attend the biggest deadlift ever. He got close. He just missed it at, right before lockout. He since has taken that record though, 410.5, and upped it to 411. So he's the biggest deadlifter in IPF history now. And yeah, if Temur had come up against any other human being who had ever lived, he would have beaten them apart from Prime Ray and Prime Jesus. Unfortunately, he ran into a Prime Jesus. It's It's been very interesting to see what Temur does at Worlds this year. Obviously, with his bodyweight drop, he's 25-ish kilos lighter than what he was at last year's Worlds. It'll be interesting to see if he is able to hit numbers close to this, and yeah, if his training style of 105 sets off 1 with sub-maximal singles is gonna help close that gap between him and Jesus. All right, my number sixth example is Gustav Hedlund at 2025 Sheffield. So Gustav had a phenomenal showing. He was the defending champion going to Sheffield this year. He hit a 335 kilo squat, which is now closing in on the world record of Gavin Aiden, only a couple kilos behind. Gustav is very much a total specialist, very well balanced across the 3 lifts, a 220 kilo bench press, and just shy of an 800 pound deadlift, a 360 kilo final pull to lock up a 915 kilo total, over 2,000 pounds. Phenomenal 9 for 9 day from Gustav there. Now the reason why this makes the list is because he is the first IPF lifter. He was the first IPF lifter to have broken Jesse Norris's famous 914 at 93 kilo world record. So Jesse Norris, all the way back in 2014, so over a decade ago now, hit 914 as a 90 kilo lifter or thereabouts in the USAPL. Slightly questionable circumstances. We don't really have video footage of that. Plus, it was done at some local high school meet on pound plates, allegedly. So yeah, slightly dodgy, but still crazy record that no one has come close to in the decade since. Technically, Jawan Garrison did it in the USAPL last year. He hit 915 as, again, a 90 kilo lifter. However, he was going to come across to the IPF side and got himself banned for declaring peptide use, which kind of puts a bit of a question mark about his whole tested status. So Gustav Hedlund, the first legit IPF powerlifter, 93 powerlifter, to go over 914 and to break that long-standing record held by Jesse Norris. Also, another point here is, I mentioned Gustav Hedlund was the defending champion. He won Sheffield in 2024. He won 2024 Sheffield with an 895 total, which was an 100.79% break off the world record, which was 888 going to 2024 Sheffield. Fast forward a year and he adds 20 kilos to his total. So not only has he increased his total and gotten stronger, he actually broke the world record more at this Sheffield than he did at the previous Sheffield. So the Sheffield where he won, he didn't break the world record as much as he did in this Sheffield where he didn't win. He came third and he didn't even win his weight class. So 101.55% is what he broke the world record by at this Sheffield, which was 901, held by Gavin Aiden. However, Emil Krastev broke it by more. So Gustav Hedlund ended up losing to Emil Krastev here head-to-head in the 93 battle at Sheffield, and they ended up both podiuming. Emil Krastev came second, and Gustav came third behind Shell. Also, for the purpose of this video, I'm looking at head-to-head weight class battles, so I don't really count Gustav losing to Shell, even though he technically did at Sheffield. I'm looking at weight class battles for this, so I'm taking into account that Gustav lost to Emil here, and Emil beat him. Emil won, aka the battle of 93s. Emil Krastev totaled 917.5, which stands as the IPF and overall 93 kilo world record, beating Gustav by 2.5 kilos. But again, absolutely phenomenal showing from Gustav, broke legendary long-standing record, and upped the world record by relatively more than what he did at the previous Sheffield where he won. Unfortunately, everyone else just leveled up around him, and Emil Krastev pulled off a miracle final deadlift to upset the Swedish defending champion. And my 7th and final lifter on this list is, of course, the recent example we've seen of this, Taylor Atwood at 2025 PA Nats. Taylor Atwood had a phenomenal showing, 317.5 kilos, 700 pound squat. I've shown these hearts now a few times and I never get sick of watching it back myself because this was so satisfying to see the GOAT return at full strength and more strength than we'd ever seen before. 216 kilo bench press. And I mentioned before that Taylor Atwood was injured for a couple of years there in 2023, not his best going into Worlds, and he moved up to the 83s, and boy was he better than ever. 342.5 kilo deadlift easy. He totaled 876, and he without a doubt had more in the tank. He took a huge jump, 25 kilo jump for his final pull to try and beat Joe Borenstein with 901. Unfortunately, that was a bit too much, but I believe he was definitely good for 880s, potentially up to 890 on that day, which is absolutely mental. So, I mean, it goes without saying why this is on the list, but the insane comeback for Taylor Atwood to come back and beat Russ's IPF and overall 83 kilo world record. Of course, Russ at Sheffield hit 870.5. I'll be honest, in my mind, he still hit 883 because that final deadlift was a robbery. I stand by that. But regardless, the record books show 870.5. So Taylor Atwood beat that. He beat Russ's total, 876. He's the second strongest 83 kilo lifter alive today and the second strongest 83 kilo lifter in history. And I mean, technically, he didn't break Russ's record because Joey B hit 878 on his opening deadlift, I think, before he upped it to 900. But still, Taylor Atwood is number 2 on the 83s list. And not only that, but the other 83s he beat. This wasn't just a 2-horse race between Taylor and Joe. Yet Delaney Wallace, 2-time world champ, world record holder, had a phenomenal day as well, hitting 867.5, almost beating Russ too. Then you had Sean Noriega, who was about a second away from 870 and ended up at 857.5 in 4th place. Then you had Ange Fortino in the 830s, looking very strong, almost pulled to be in the 850s. So Taylor Atwood beat an absolute murderer's row of 83s, aside from one, and that was Joe Borenstein. So as I mentioned earlier, Joe Borenstein moved up and went from being a very, very strong 74/75 lifter who was kind of in Austin Perkins' shadow and not getting the full credit for it, to becoming the strongest 83 on the planet, which he actually did last year when he hit 865 at SBD Rally. That was the overall world record at the time, being Russ's 860. Russ got it back at Sheffield, and Joe B has since absolutely murdered it and took it from 870.5 all the way to 900. Absolutely unbelievable. But there you have it, the 7 most impressive losing performances in powerlifting history.